Hello and welcome to another episode of Children's Moments here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're back with another object lesson, so I'll turn it over to Miss Ruth and we'll get started with today's lesson.
Well, Timothy, we're going to do a similar experiment to one we've done before, but a little twist on it. And we're going to be talking about fear. My friend and I have been doing a study on fear, and we've been talking about in the study how we overcome fear with faith. So I want to read some verses to start with. We're going to start with Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 to 6. It says, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.' So we say with confidence, 'The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?'" And then in Joshua, when Joshua's afraid, when he's taken over after Moses being in leadership, this is what Joshua heard from the Lord. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And then, of course, a lot of the Psalms talk to our fears. We're going to read in a couple places. Psalm 73, verse 23 says, "Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand." And Psalm 91, my favorite, we're going to read 1 through 4. "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." So we're going to do a little experiment here now and talk about how it relates to fear. So I have this jar of water here, and I'm going to add some soap to it. And then would you carefully shake that up a little bit without getting it all over yourself, so we get lots of bubbles in there, okay? So that is our fears that we put in there. And as you shook it, and we kind of think about our fears as shaking them up a little bit, right?
Yep.
And it got worse, right? The bubbles got worse. Shake it a little more, so we have lots of bubbles in there. So the more we think about and hang on to the fears and shake them up, the worse it gets, right? So now we need to have faith overcome these fears. So we're going to take the lid off this. And I would like you to take that glass of water, and I'd like you to pour some red in here. The red's going to represent Jesus in our lives. Of course, we think of His blood that was shed for us. So we're going to put the red dye in there and get that a little mixed up so the water becomes red. And this red is going to represent what Jesus can do to help us overcome our fears. Okay, so if you, stir that up a little bit there. Okay, now as you pour that in, go ahead and pour it in. Let's see if we can get rid of the fear as we have more of Jesus in us. So what's happening to the bubbles now?
Bubbles are coming out.
The bubbles keep going. Just let those bubbles all get away from the fears. And what did Jesus do for us?
Got all of them out.
All the bubbles out. I think you can pour even a little more to get the top, a little fear lingering there. We don't want any of that fear lingering. There you go. Very
All
good.
gone.
So, if we think of the verses we were talking about, there are two things that can really help us understand how Jesus helps us overcome our fears. The presence of Jesus with us. So as you pour that water in, was His presence represented there. And then, of course, He's completely holding our fears, right? He got rid of them. He's holding them.
They're all gone.
So I want you to think of, when we're afraid, think of Jesus' presence can make that fear go away, and He's holding us as we think of being in His shelter, as we looked in Psalm 91. So I was thinking a little bit about when you were afraid when you were little, and when I was afraid, especially when I was little. And of course, we do carry fears into our adulthood. But when I was afraid was especially during storms when I was little. And my parents would let me drag a sleeping bag into their bedroom, and I could sleep on their floor, and just being in my parents' presence helped dispel that fear. When you were afraid, especially with storms, and you had a big fear of them, we couldn't even watch the weather when you were little, I remember I would quote to you a verse. Do you remember what it was?
No.
"What time I am afraid, I will trust in you." And I would hold you and quote you that verse, and the presence of your mom or your dad with you helped dispel your fears, right? And you knew we were holding you. And I brought along another little friend. Do you remember this friend?
Sheepy. Yep.
And what did Sheepy do for you?
Comfort.
Comforted.
Take away the fear.
So the presence of Sheepy at bedtime really helped you go to sleep and not be afraid, and you knew you had something to hold on to, right?
Yeah.
So Sheepy is just a little small representative what Jesus can do for us, right? And what we saw with our object lesson, he gives us something to hold on to, and he's holding our fears. Look at this. He's there with us. He's holding on to our fears, and his presence helps get rid of them. So that's my challenge tonight for all of us to take upon ourselves.
Awesome. Well, we hope that you've been challenged and encouraged by this week's episode, and that you'll join us next time for another episode of Children's Moments here on Heavenward Thinking.